New information on a chef who on the outside was praised for what he did in the kitchen.
The UMPD found some blood in the bathroom, and there's another female party there.
But now, that chef is accused of the horrific murder of his wife, someone who friends say cared deeply for others. That's video per Mass Live. We have some shocking new information about what chef turned alleged killer Jeffrey Macdonald allegedly did in the hours leading up to the murder. We're on the case presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. If you search the name Jeffrey Macdonald and UMass before April 22nd, you probably would have seen a lot of posts that talked about how awesome he was as a chef, someone who led the way in the world of campus dining. But by now, we all know that there is a lot more to who that man allegedly is. And we've learned why he may have been at that hotel in the first place. And we're also learning more information about the woman who is the victim in this story. Jeffrey Macdonald's wife, the woman he allegedly killed. She reportedly told her friend in the days leading up to the murder about her husband and some of the concerns that she allegedly had. Now, the victim's name is Emma Macdonald, and she is someone who deserves so much attention for the life that she lived. She leaves behind a young daughter and 2 dogs who she loved deeply. Friends say she was an incredible woman, and we're going to talk a lot about what the efforts look like right now in getting justice for her. Now, the man accused of killing her on the surface, again, he was someone who, in a lot of ways, was put up on a pedestal. And he was this award-winning chef because he was one of the leaders in campus dining at UMass. And frankly, he was kind of a recruiting tool for the school. Go to the Princeton Review. Check this out. You look at the top places in the country for campus dining, and if you're a prospective student and that matters to you, UMass is right at the top. And Chef Jeffrey Macdonald was a big reason why. The 36-year-old was named Chef of the Year by the American Culinary Federation in 2025 for his cooking. And that's just one of several awards that he won for his culinary expertise as a chef at UMass Amherst. But it's hard to say any of that matters now, considering this is the image we now think of and we see when we think about Jeffrey Macdonald. This is per WWLP of his first court appearance after the alleged murder of Emma Macdonald.
Attention, Medic 3. Attention, Medic 3. Response. 1 Campus Center Way, Campus Center Hotel, UMass, room 413. It's going to be for a possible mental health issue.
That is what 911 dispatchers said after the call came in to police in Western Massachusetts from Hotel UMass. This was first posted by Mass Live. Now, this, again, it's an on-campus hotel, and the dispatchers said that there was a problem in room 413.
UMPD is yelling about having a body down and needing additional personnel.
Now, before we get into the new details that we have about that part of the case, I want to talk a little bit more about Emma Macdonald, because online records show that she also was an employee at UMass. One of her friends told the Boston Globe in 2022 she married Jeffrey Macdonald. She had a 10-year-old daughter. Jeffrey had 2 kids from a previous marriage, and we also have some new documents laying out the issues the mother of those children had about Jeffrey in recent years. A friend of Emma's told the Globe that Emma had some concerns about Jeffrey's behavior in the days and the weeks leading up to her murder. She said that Emma loved Jeffrey, though, and she really believed in him, which makes this story so incredibly tragic. In her interview, though, there was an anecdote that really stood out and laid out what could be described as some very bizarre behavior of Jeffrey Macdonald allegedly over the past month. This friend said that Jeffrey and Emma had planned a trip to Disney World with their kids just 2 weeks before Emma died. But how about this for whiplash? 1 week later, Jeffrey asked for a divorce. Then on the day of the murder, this is April 22nd, there's this video that was posted online by Mass Live, and it shows Jeffrey jumping into a pond on campus, and he's in his full chef outfit. So the weather in Amherst, Mass that day was in the 20s. And if you watch the video, you can hear people laughing as Jeffrey goes in the water. But that video apparently doesn't tell the mood of the situation. In the Boston Globe article, Emma's friend said that someone called 911 after Jeffrey got out of the pond because of the way that he was acting. Then, after speaking with police, and we don't know the details of that conversation, Jeffrey booked a room at Hotel UMass for the night. And the friend says that Emma's plan was to stay at home. They lived roughly 20 minutes away from campus. And the friend said, quote, "It was recommended that they cool off because of his behavior and what was going on," end quote.
79 from Medic 3.
Go ahead, Medic 3.
I need an additional ambulance here as soon as possible, and I need X7, please.
This is what the police report says happened that night. On Wednesday, April 22nd, 2026, at approximately 7:42 p.m., officers from the UMass Amherst Police Department and firefighters, paramedics from the Amherst Fire Department were dispatched to room 413 of Hotel UMass at One Campus Centerway, Amherst, Mass, after a 911 call was placed describing an emergency taking place at that location. Given the circumstances, officers from the Hadley Police Department also responded to assist. Now, you're talking about multiple agencies responding to whatever is going on the fourth floor of this hotel. And when police got to room 413, they were allegedly met by the same man who you see smiling with medals around his neck as this great chef on campus. But the person that they were allegedly interacting with was acting incredibly different from the person who the community thought they knew. The report goes on to say, quote, "Upon the arrival of police officers, a violent struggle took place between them and a male, Jeffrey C. Macdonald, during which J. Macdonald threw objects in the direction of the officers and struck one UMass police officer in the face on more than one occasion." Now, that's not all first responders walk into. Upon entering room 413, officers located a deceased female with significant injuries. Given the significant nature of the female's injuries, it seemed apparent to investigators that her injuries had resulted from a violent assault. Now, here's where the story takes an even more shocking turn. Quote, "J. Macdonald was placed under arrest and transported to the UMass Amherst Police Department. After being read his Miranda rights, J. Macdonald spoke with investigators during which he admitted that he had intentionally beaten his, and the name is redacted, to death using his hands, feet, as well as a variety of other blunt objects, and that it was his intent to kill her in doing so." According to police, Jeffrey Macdonald confessed to them that he intentionally beat Emma to death using his hands, feet, and a variety of blunt objects. Now, again, the next day, Jeffrey made his first court appearance, and here it is per WWLP. And during that brief hearing, he didn't really show any emotion on his face. Macdonald pleaded not guilty to his charges, and he was given no bail ahead of a probable cause hearing that is scheduled for May 22nd. And he is going to go through a psych evaluation. I'm going to talk about that with our guest here in just a moment, because that actually could have some major implications in how this case plays out. But it's also important to note that this isn't the first time that Jeffrey's alleged behavior was concerning, and it's been brought up in the legal system before. These are records that we found related to a custody case involving the mother of his two children, and it goes back to 2021. And we found these in family and probate court in Hampden County, Massachusetts. In September of 2024, the mother of Macdonald's children wrote that she wanted to change the custody arrangement that they had because, quote, "Children have been reporting verbal abuse from their father, yelling, being called names, swearing, witnessing demeaning verbal abuse between father and stepmother, and yesterday reported physical abuse. Oldest child reported that his father shoved him with full force into a table on Monday, 9/16, and that he has hurt him in the face on multiple occasions. Children have been asking to not return to their father's house consistently over the past year. Both children reported that their father told them not to report abuse to their mother, and both are fearful of retaliation and father abuse." Roughly 2 months after the woman filed that against Macdonald, the judge dismissed the case because neither of them showed up in court. Join us now to talk more about this case is Melba Pearson, civil rights and criminal law attorney and host of the Resident Legal Diva YouTube channel. It's always great to have you here on Law and Crime. You know, just a very tough case of alleged domestic violence here involving someone in the community who is really known. What do you make of what has been alleged about Jeffrey Macdonald's behavior the day that this happened? But then you also, it seems like going back weeks, that there was just some, what has been characterized by some as red flags involving how he was acting.
Yeah. So again, Chris, always great to be on with you. And I mean, these cases are always incredibly heartbreaking. And the first thing is always what red flags were missed, what signs were missed. Sometimes there's signs, sometimes there's not. In this instance, it seems in the weeks prior, and I say this with a grain of salt, and I'm going to tell you why momentarily. But it does seem that he was almost having a mental break in terms of his strange behavior and diving into like a freezing pond, whether it was the day before or the morning of the homicide. So he clearly was having some sort of psychological issues, it looks like. Could have been an undiagnosed mental health disorder, could have been just a break because of stress, who knows? But I want to make something very clear. Two things can be true at the same time. You can have a mental illness and not be an abuser. And you can have a mental illness and be an abuser, and the two almost have nothing to do with each other, right? Because it's about the mindset and how you view the relationship. If you view your partner as a possession, mental health has nothing to do with it, right? That's just you innately have this mindset that causes you to act in a violent manner. But there are plenty of people who have bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, who do not harm their partners. So I don't want to I think it's very easy to reduce a domestic violence incident because we're all struggling to make sense of what happened and it's horrible. It's very easy to default, oh, the person has mental health issue or mental health disorder. That should not be the default. That may be true, but let's also examine the broader mindset and societal issues that fuel domestic violence rather than just quickly putting it in the mental health category and not diving deeper.
And I think that's a great point too. And this is kind of like a side comment of just like, there are a lot of people who live with bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, which can be very dangerous mental health conditions. No doubt. We've certainly seen that in stories we cover, but there's a lot of people who you never hear about and live incredibly normal lives and do not find themselves in a situation like Jeffrey Macdonald currently is. And I don't know if he has a mental health diagnosis, but he is going over reportedly a psych evaluation. What will that potentially find? Like, how does that factor into the case that he's facing just in terms of the legal system?
Well, first and foremost, they have to figure out whether or not he's competent to stand trial. He has to be able to, the standard is meaningfully participate in his defense. And so I'm going to give a hypothetical, which is going to be oversimplified, but hopefully it'll get the point across. It's basically, if you are in a place where you're like, Martians are coming tomorrow, you're clearly not in a mindset, in a frame of mind to be able to meaningfully talk to your defense attorney about strategy, about should I testify, should I not testify? If the defense attorney shows you some of the evidence the prosecution has against you, can you at least have a basic understanding of what's being said and say, okay, I understand, I do not want to testify, or I contest this because of this, or I have another witness. That discussion is very important in order for a defense attorney to put together a case and be able to effectively represent you in court. So the evaluation is going to be critical to figure out if he is truly competent to stand trial. If he is not, he likely would go to a facility where he would receive treatment. And usually in about 6 months to a year, they bring the case back and they do another evaluation. And then they make a determination at that point if he is indeed competent to stand trial. So that's sort of how that process moves. The whole goal is, can we restore quote unquote competency? Or if not, if the person is just really just not with us from that perspective, then the discussion would be, maybe is this a not guilty by reason of insanity or something along those lines? We're not there yet. But first things first, is he competent to stand trial? Then, if he is competent to stand trial, does he have a mental health concern? Does he have schizophrenia, bipolar disease, whatever? If that's the case, all right, let's get him on medication. So again, he can be lucid and be a participating member of his defense. So all of those things kind of come into play in terms of defense strategy as well as prosecution strategy as well.
And I think that's another good point where just because somebody may not be competent to stand trial, that's not a forever thing. Potentially.
Correct.
It's not, when someone is found not guilty by reason of insanity, that is very different.
Correct.
When it comes to someone being found not competent.
Correct. Because not guilty by reason of insanity means, listen, the person is so far gone. It doesn't matter if you give them the meds for 6 months, a year, 2 years, they're not coming back that easily. And those cases are more rare than you would think. So usually people are able to be restored to competence, again, because of the fact that sometimes there's an undiagnosed mental health disorder. And if that's the case, all right, get them on a treatment plan. And in a few months, they're back to where they need to be. But if somebody is so far gone, then that's a situation where they might, back in the day, you used to put them in a mental institution, right? We don't really do that now, but there are special provisions for somebody who is just not competent in that way. I don't know if that's the case here. Again, we're in early days. We need to see what the evaluation says, and we need to see what the judge ends up doing as a result. And again, it could be a situation where they get evaluated by 3 doctors because again, the defense is going to have their folks that they like to take their clients to, and the prosecution is going to have somebody that they feel is, no, this is the expert we need to go with. And then the court may be like, you know what, I want to get this person who I think is the most neutral. They look at all 3 reports and then decide whether or not somebody is competent to stand trial, if that's truly an issue.
And when it comes to, he's facing incredibly serious charges, could spend the rest of his life in prison if he is found guilty. And of course, he's presumed innocent until that would happen. But if there's a case where you look at the day of and he's like jumping into the water and people are laughing, but then reportedly there was this 911 call that was made. And then that's how he ends up in the hotel, is because police said, hey, why don't you just get a room here tonight, cool off. And then it seems Emma was there as well, just according to this friend saying like she was going to stay at home, and police refer to that as like a cooling off period. And so there's a lot of details on that part that have not been brought out, but you hear that and erratic behavior was how one person described it. But then you look at like this pattern over the last several weeks where they were going to go to Disney reportedly. And then then he says that he wants a divorce. And it's like, how does the legal system, if it's the case where like maybe there is a mental health issue in that moment, but then also there's this pattern where maybe there is domestic abuse and like you're building this case, like how does the legal system balance that out where both of those things can be true?
Yeah. And again, when we listen to the facts, it is very perturbing because usually we see the reverse. It's usually the spouse that asks for a divorce. And then that's what triggers the violent incident in terms of the abuser feels they've lost control. And so now they want to reassert that dominance and control through the use of violence. And then it leads to a lethal outcome. So that part is over there. But what I'm also looking at is a potential missed opportunity. So every state has some version of involuntary hospitalization. So in Florida, where I'm based, we call it the Baker Act. But basically, it's a process by which law enforcement can take someone basically into custody, not in the jail, but they get taken into custody and then brought to a hospital for 24 to 48 hours for observation to figure out, okay, does this person have a mental health concern? Do they need medication? Okay, and based on that, they're given referrals. All right, you need to see a psychiatrist. You need to go to this program, whatever the case may be. But at least that to me is the proper way to have that cooling off, because it's not like he was upset and they were mad and they had a fight. Okay, you go over here, calm down, breathe, and then do it tomorrow. You're jumping into a freezing lake. You're exhibiting strange behaviors that could be consistent with a mental health break. Then the police department should have taken him and basically involuntarily hospitalized him, and maybe she would still be with us today. This is not to lay blame at the police's feet, but there is a scenario where if he had been hospitalized, maybe he would have gotten the help that he needed, again, assuming this is purely mental health, and that could have headed off a lethal event.
Well, and very, very different case. I say that, but I think, everybody remembers back to the Gabby Petito case where there was, I think Brian Laundrie ended up going to the hotel. She stayed back at the RV that they had, and then eventually they meet up that night. In this case, this friend is saying that Emma Macdonald was going to go back to their home, and then Jeffrey Macdonald was going to stay at the hotel. It'd be interesting. I know the local district attorney didn't want to comment on anything related to that as of yet. We've sadly had to talk about cases of family violence and domestic violence and some of the stories that we've covered far too often. And like one line that stood out to me that the friend had told the Boston Globe was that, Emma loved him and she really believed in him. And he was this person who's like, I keep bringing it up. I used to work in Western Mass, and like UMass takes like campus dining incredibly seriously. Like it is a recruiting tool for this school. And he was this symbol of that. And like, you can see why he would be someone who you really would believe in. But in some of these domestic violence cases, I think for an awareness purpose, like what do you see when it comes to just like, we'll focus on the bad because of what this happened, but like those good moments along the way, and like how it just doesn't seem like it's just a trajectory of like an awful relationship, but we just see just oftentimes like the toxic quality of like things that are on the up, like planning a Disney trip, and then things just can go, it's just this swing that goes down. Like, and in this case, he allegedly wanted a divorce a week later. It's hard to make sense of it.
Yeah, but again, based on the little facts that we have, because again, we do not have the entire picture, but that behavior just seems very consistent with someone who is, whether it's bipolar or something, but they're going through these waves, these ebbs and flows. And it's incredibly difficult to be in a relationship with somebody who is struggling with mental health, especially if it's undiagnosed and they're not even on a treatment plan. So you're trying to govern yourself day by day. You don't even know like who you're waking up next to, right? Like today they could be fine and tomorrow they could be, or even from moment to moment, right? So all of that becomes very difficult. But still, at the same token, what people often forget about domestic violence relationships, intimate partner violence relationships, it's not like there's a violent event every single day. Some cases, yes, but as a general premise, maybe something happens today. There's the I'm sorry, there's that whole cycle, this and that. There may not be another incident for 3 months. And in between those 3 months, you're going to work, you're raising your family, you're doing all of these things, and you're not necessarily actively telling people, oh my God, my husband's this, my partner's this, my wife is this, whatever. You're just living a normal life. So I think people sometimes have in their head that it's like every single day is this horrible, violent, crazy situation. Most people can't survive that just from a mental perspective, because that's a lot. But it's like any relationship, it ebbs and flows, and except the difference is when there's a disagreement that every relationship has, it ends up turning violent, or there's the use of coercion or other things that are in the background. So I just want to remind people of that. And also that sometimes there aren't signs. Sometimes people are very private, and when they walk out the door, they don't have a black eye, they don't have broken bones, but they may not be able to control their finances. They may not be able to go out with friends without a problem or see family members. So there's different ways it can manifest, and it's not necessarily visible to everyone. So I just want to send a message of comfort to those who are affected by this, because again, and sadly, I know this firsthand on way too many levels, and not just as a prosecutor, you're going through and replaying the tape. If I had done this, did I miss something? She said this in this conversation. Was she really trying to tell me? Was it a cry for help? You will drive yourself to drink on that. Don't. You can only do what you can, and just try to take comfort in the memories, the beautiful memories you had with the person you loved. But don't keep trying to replay the tape, because you're never going to find a satisfactory answer ever.
No, and it's really, and that was really well put. And this is just a very tough story for that reason. Police say after he was read his Miranda rights, he pretty much admitted to it from what we can read in the police report. Knowing that, and it's not necessarily a whodunit kind of case. And maybe he is diagnosed with some sort of mental health issue. But if it's not guilty by reason of insanity, like how does that factor into his defense? Like if prosecutors are still charging him with murder, they're trying him for murder, this is what they say happened, he's the one who did it, and the defense, maybe the only thing they have is like, well, he has a previously undiagnosed condition. And I don't know, I'm just speaking like generally, like how does this potentially play out?
Well, how it would play out is that the defense will try and attack the intent. That was he even able to really form that intent to harm her? Did he really know what he was doing? It's going to be the mental health aspect is going to be woven into the defense at different points in time and being like, listen, he's a productive member of society, hypothetically speaking. He's he has this, very public facing persona and job, and he's been successful in all of this. This is not his normal behavior. So this was a break in time, he's going to get help, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know how that's necessarily going to play for the jury.
Because if it's not like a not guilty by reason of insanity type situation, like if it doesn't reach that bar,
correct, then
what do you have other than that?
Not much.
Really?
Not much, because again, the Constitution guarantees you a defense. It doesn't necessarily guarantee you a winning defense. So right. Defense attorney is going to work with what they have. They can't make it up. It is what it is. But, this is a case that I see that's going to resolve in a plea, because what are you going to go to trial with? You've got the admission, you've got, the medical examiner, the coroner is going to come back and say that this is a homicide. You have the evidence that came from the hotel room, all of the friends and everyone else who witnessed the bizarre behavior, the video of him jumping into the pond, all of that. I don't see a scenario where he's going to be able to go to trial and somehow prevail. So I see this resolving likely in a plea.
Yeah, and we'll see what plays out next. No doubt, just an incredibly tragic story. I know they held, at the time of recording this yesterday on UMass, a vigil for Emma Macdonald, who was also a beloved member of that community, a mom who leaves a daughter behind. It's just very, very sad. Melba Pearson, thank you as always for taking the time to be with us. You can find her as the host of the Resident Legal Diva YouTube channel. Always great to have you here on Law and Crime. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Chris.
A vigil was held in Emma's honor on the UMass campus. Again, she worked at UMass as well. There's also a GoFundMe that is raising money for her 10-year-old daughter, and that has raised more than $20,000. I want to note before we go an important resource when it comes to issues of domestic violence, and this allegedly was that. If you or anyone you know may be a victim of domestic violence, you can call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-SAFE, or you can text START to 88788, and you can remain anonymous. And this line, it is staffed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify, and we're also streaming on Peacock. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.